Larry Pratt's latest book is now available. On the Firing Line, Essays in the Defense of Liberty can be purchased from Gun Owners of America for only $18 plus shipping and handling. On the Firing Line is a collection of essays that GOA's Executive Director Larry Pratt has written over the last few years. They were composed in the battle to defend the right to keep and bear arms, as well as the rest of our liberties protected in the Bill of Rights. Pratt has taken on the arguments used by the enemies of freedom who would disarm and subjugate Americans. Pratt shows that the debate transcends firearms because the debate is really about control. Who will control the lives of private citizens? Will it be each person individually, or will it be the government? You can order your copy of On the Firing Line by going to the GOA website at gunowners.org, or you can call GOA's toll-free number 1-888-886-GUNS. That's 888-886-GUNS.
This is the Gun Owners News Hour, with the latest news about threats to your liberty and your right to keep and bear arms. Our host is Larry Pratt, Executive Director of Gun Owners of America. Our guests include elected and other public officials, journalists, citizen activists, and others who are fighting for the Bill of Rights, especially the Second Amendment. The Gun Owners News Hour covers a broad range of constitutional issues, particularly the debate over private ownership of firearms. Remember, the issue is not just about gun control, it's about control.
Hello and welcome to this edition of the News Hour. I want to talk today with a longtime friend, Michael Connolly. He is the Chief Executive Officer of the United States Justice Foundation, and actually they deal with a lot of injustice, but that's why they're the Justice Foundation. And one of the things that prompted me to want to have Mike on the program today is their heavy involvement in a case that is just right out of the past of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. Things that one would have hoped were no longer being practiced by the agency. They're back. And they've done some terrible things to a firearms dealer, a family business in New Mexico. And Mike, why don't you just kind of give us a little account of what these folks are like, what they were doing, how all this happened to them. It's really quite a long chain of things that they have had happen to them. So let's give it a try.
Well, thank you, Larry. Thank you for having me on.
Yes, sir.
Basically, this is the Reese family, and they owned a firearm business. They were licensed firearm dealers in New Mexico. It was the father and the mother and two sons who owned the business, and they had owned it for years. They were also, though, active Tea Party members, which apparently puts up flags with all kinds of federal agencies these days.
Especially the IRS takes note of that. We're learning, haven't we?
Right, yeah. Exactly. And unfavorable note, I might add.
Yeah.
But apparently the ATF does the same thing. But in any case, this family, this was during the Operation Fast and Furious, which should still be investigated because we still don't know what happened there. We know that the Attorney General's office signed off on an operation that ended up transferring about 2,500 weapons to the semi-automatic weapons to drug dealers, drug cartels in Mexico.
And also, you may have better data than I do, but the last I've heard, some 400 Mexicans are dead because of the guns that our government caused to go south to Mexico.
Oh, that's correct.
Speaking today with Michael Connolly, the Chief Executive Officer of the United States Justice Foundation, and we're going to get back to talking about the New Mexico gun business of the Reese family, but I wanted to just take a moment longer to actually look at the context in which what the government did to the Reese family was occurring, namely the Fast and Furious scandal. Mike, you were talking about the mounting casualty rate. What are the latest numbers you've seen?
Well, I don't have any hard numbers at this point. I just know that every once in a while we're hearing, particularly along the Texas border here, that there have been more people killed in cartel violence, and that is being traced back to some of those same weapons. And, of course, we lost two of our own federal agents as a result of these weapons. We know now, because of emails and memorandum that were obtained by congressional committees, that the sole purpose behind this, the real purpose behind Operation Fast and Furious, was not to get to the drug cartels, not to arrest any of them, not really to arrest any of the straw buyers that were being used. None of the cartel members have been arrested as a result of this, but it was to give the president moral authority, he thought, to put sanctions on gun stores, particularly in the 4 states of Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California.
And, of course, that gets us back to this family because they were going to be part of the props of the potted plants that were going to decorate the stage that was being set to show that American gun owners, American gun dealers, bad. Government, good. Need to get rid of the bad.
Exactly. They were set up. And basically the way this scenario developed was that Terry Reese, the mother who owns part of the business, part of the family, she received a trace request that indicated that a weapon had been recovered that they had sold to somebody. So she followed through with it to try to give some information to local authorities, particularly Deputy Batts with the New Mexico Police, or the area sheriff's office. And she gave him information which he passed on to ATF, and they started trying to find out where this weapon had originated. It originated with their gun store. It had been sold to a straw buyer, somebody who admitted in court that the Reese family did not know she was a straw buyer. But then they arrested the person it was actually given to, the weapon. He turned on the Reese family at the request, apparently, of the ATF, and started saying, they knew what was going on here. So the ATF sets up a sting operation, and they use their own agents, and they buy weapons, and then they claim that they were straw buyers and that the Reese family should have known about it. Well, they ran background checks on these people. Nothing came up. They had no reason to know. But the bottom line is they charged the Reese family, all 4 members of the family, with 30 counts of violation of federal law. The judge threw out a couple of the counts. The matter went to trial. One son was found not guilty on everything. Terry Reese, the mother, was found guilty of 1 paperwork violation, and the father, Rick Reese, and the other son were found guilty of 4 minor paperwork violations, which should never even been charged as felonies. We now think that these were misdemeanors to begin with. And then something explosive happens. The defense attorneys find out that the primary witness against the Reese family, this Deputy Batts, turns out that he had been under investigation for almost 2 years for being a member of or working with the Mexican drug cartel. And this was never pointed out to the defense attorneys. They had no opportunity to challenge his credibility on that basis. The judge wrote an opinion, a scathing opinion, basically saying the U.S. Attorney's Office here had withheld vital information, and he granted a new trial. That's how we got involved, because in addition to charging this family on these bogus charges, the government also confiscated their store, their ranch, their store inventory, their cars, their bank accounts. They ran out of money. When
I was back in university, I read a book called Oriental Despotism. And I knew I was onto something because in the seminar that I was giving a report on the book to, the professor, I thought that was one of the first times I'd seen a liberal's head really explode. And I know what's the matter with this guy. He's God infected. Well, the description of how the Oriental despot works is what you were just telling us was done to the Reese family. They come in and just, if they leave you alive, you don't have anything left. And then you're supposed to fight the bottomless pockets of the federal government in your poverty. Pretty cool system. Oriental despotism, it sure looks like. We're going to be back and talk some more with Michael Conley of the United States Justice Foundation.
The Bill of Rights protects every American's God-given right to keep and bear arms. Now that right is being seriously undermined as legally registered rifles are being confiscated in some parts of our country. If we're not careful, we may find ourselves with no right to own guns, and that's where Gun Owners of America comes in. Gun Owners of America is in Washington every day fighting for you to keep that right. Congressman Ron Paul has called GOA the only no-compromise gun lobby in Washington. You need to be part of this great grassroots group of activists who are keeping the heat on their members of Congress. Find out right now how you can join. Call 888-886-GUNS and get started receiving their fact-filled newsletters and action alerts. Call 888-886-GUNS or go to their webpage at gunowners.org and help make your voice heard in Washington. Make that call right now and call Gun Owners of America at 888-886-GUNS. Remember, it's not just about gun control, it's about control.
Michael Connolly's been involved through the United States Justice Foundation with the Reese family, and that's the case that we've led off with in our discussion today. The enormous hammer the federal government has to come in and clean you out. Michael, I'd like to think that this is an unusual situation, something maybe particularly concerning about the Reese family. Maybe they would flee if they had their resources. What exactly is this common, and what is the justification for it?
Well, it's called the forfeiture legislation, and basically it allows the federal government to come in and civilly confiscate all of your assets. If you're being charged with a crime, it doesn't matter whether or not they even have the evidence to convict you. Sometimes they don't even charge you. They just take your assets and say, we think you're a drug dealer. We're not going to charge you criminally. We're just going to take everything you own. This has been going on for years. I fought it for years when I was in private practice on behalf of various clients. And so they've taken away the Reese's ability to defend themselves. That's the whole purpose. That's why the U.S. Justice Foundation and Gun Owners of America stepped in, and we have our attorneys working with the Reese family attorneys on the appeal, because the judge granted the motion for a new trial and released the family from jail. The father and one of the sons had been in jail for 17 months at that point. He released the family from jail, and the U.S. Attorney's Office has appealed this granting of the motion for a new trial.
Michael, where do they live? Their house is gone. Their income is gone. They can't go to a motel. How are they making it?
Well, basically through the help of friends and relatives is what it boils down to. When they went back to their ranch, and they didn't, as I understand it, move back into their ranch at this point because it has been confiscated, but basically they've been ransacked by the ATF. Everything was gone, and what wasn't gone was torn up. I mean, this was just blatant retribution against these people for doing nothing other than the fact that they're resisting what was happening to them in the courts. And the ATF here, the U.S. Attorney's Office, relied on the testimony to convict these people of these minor charges. It relied on testimony of criminals, convicted criminals, or suspected criminals. And that's what the judge was so upset about. So we're working to try to...
So what you're saying is the U.S. attorney knew he was working with toxic, damaged material.
Absolutely. They had been forced to admit that, and that's what the judge says in his opinion. As I said, it is a scathing opinion. He just blasts the U.S. Attorney's Office here. But this U.S. attorney is trying to get appointed to a federal judgeship by Obama, and he wants to be on the good side of the ATF and the Justice Department. So he is appealing this, which is going to make, we're funding right now the appeal, and because the Reeses can't do it themselves.
This is just, it makes me mad every time I think about a case like this, certainly this one in particular. These people have had their lives turned upside down, and the government, are there any good guys? Are there any agents like that John Dodson that had too much of it, of the same kind of stuff actually over in Phoenix, too many guns being allowed to go into the wrong hands, and he finally came out into the light and testified against his own agency, and at least in his case, it made it look like most of the problem, other than agents that would go along and follow orders, but the orders were coming from Washington. They were coming from bureaucrats and attorneys in the sort of the hierarchy. Is that also the pattern here, you've mentioned Fast and Furious, so to a certain extent there had to have been an impetus from Washington, from the regional office, I guess, Phoenix, for this part of New Mexico? I don't know.
Well, I'm not sure whether that's part of the Phoenix office or not. As Las Cruces, New Mexico, is where the trial is being held, where the court appearances are being made. But, it all boils down to the same thing. The ultimate goal of Operation Fast and Furious was to take out the gun dealers in these states. Well, it failed miserably, so they went after, this is a test case. Make no mistake about it. If they
right.
In putting the Reese's out of business, and whether they lock them up or not, just putting them out of business and stopping them from legally selling firearms, then they're going to do the same thing to other stores all over the country. So this is a test case that they have to win, and that's one reason that the U.S. Justice Foundation has gotten so heavily involved in it, and it's raising money to help this family because, there's more at stake here than just this family. And by the way, they are very, very nice people, well respected in their community. They have never been convicted of any crimes or charged with any crimes until our own government comes after them. Our government seems these days to be coming after everybody that owns a firearm or sells a firearm. The veterans or military veterans are getting clobbered. It's just one scenario after another.
It is kind of interesting that Janet Napolitano has told us who the profile of suspected terrorists, what that profile is. They're Second Amendment people, they're pro-life people, they're lower taxes people, they're veterans. Perhaps more generally, I think she also said, if they seem to be hung up on the Constitution thingy, all of those are the guys to watch out for. And so we keep having Muslims go bang because they're not watching people that go bang. They're after their political enemies who they are characterizing, hopefully not that successfully, as the potential terrorists. It's incredible.
It is incredible. I'm on every one of those lists. I've covered all those categories. So.
Yeah, I sort of took it personal, too. Let me give out your web address before we take a break and come back. You can contact and support the United States Justice Foundation at usjf.net. Obviously, you can see they need some help for this family. Consider helping them out, folks.
The Bill of Rights protects every American's God-given right to keep and bear arms. Now that right is being seriously undermined as legally registered rifles are being confiscated in some parts of our country. If we're not careful, we may find ourselves with no right to own guns, and that's where Gun Owners of America comes in. Gun Owners of America is in Washington every day fighting for you to keep that right. Congressman Ron Paul has called GOA the only no-compromise gun lobby in Washington. You need to be part of this great grassroots group of activists who are keeping the heat on their members of Congress. Find out right now how you can join. Call 888-886-GUNS and get started receiving their fact-filled newsletters and action alerts. Call 888-886-GUNS or go to their webpage at gunowners.org and help make your voice heard in Washington. Make that call right now and call Gun Owners of America at 888-886-GUNS. Remember, it's not just about gun control, it's about control.
My guest today is Michael Connolly. He is the CEO of the United States Justice Foundation. And in case that web address went by too quickly right before the break, you can find them and support them at usjf.net. So, Michael, where does this thing go? Are they likely to get their property, their money back anytime soon from this forfeiture procedure? What's the next appointment in court, if you will?
Well, there's a civil suit's been filed to get their property back. That's being handled separately from what we're dealing with. We hope they will be successful in that, and I think if we win on this appeal, they ultimately will be. But here's the situation. If we are successful in the appeal and the judges uphold the granting of a new trial, we don't know what the U.S. attorney will do there. With all of the bad press and all of the facts that involving them using witnesses who were basically, like I said, criminals or being investigated as criminals, we don't see how they can get by with trying to try these people again. But we don't know if they'll do that. They may do that just to grind them down. So we think we will win this appeal. We're confident we will win the appeal, and the judge's order will be upheld. But then we may have to deal at that point with a situation where they're going to be tried again. And, it's just relentless. When the federal government gets after you, they continue to be after you.
Michael,
they lose.
Is there anything that could be done in the context of malicious prosecution? I mean, this is pretty evil.
Oh, it is evil, but the problem is that basically U.S. attorneys, like most district attorneys, are immune from prosecution. The exception being if they do something fraudulent. And here we would think that this pretty much borders on fraud, if it's not fraud outright. When you use a witness that you know is being investigated for being involved with the drug cartels, is under criminal investigation, you use that as your chief witness in a trial, you know what's going on, you know who this person is. It's not like they were caught by surprise. They just withheld the information from the defendant and their attorneys. I think that there might be a possibility here of a civil suit down the road, but that'll be for somebody else to deal with. Our concern is to keep the Reeses from going to jail, to get their property back, to get their business back, and to try to let them put their lives back together.
Well, that is a very worthy objective. Obviously, it'll be very hard to make whole all of what the government has done to them. What do you do with a year and a half of your life where they just poked a big old hole in it? And from what I understand, we got a couple of attorneys that are going to be working on some of this appellate stuff with you. When you get locked up, what the government did to these people when they were locked up, they weren't in the same physical place. They were in 3 different locations so that they could not communicate with each other except through when the wife finally got out. She could go to one jail and then go to another jail and say, well, Ryan just told me this. And it just, they actually have policies evidently to just grind you down, and they're convinced you're guilty, or maybe I don't know. What do you think? Do they convince themselves that everybody else is a crook and they have it coming, or how do you think they justify this in their own mind?
The way I read it, and I've seen this throughout my practice with some of the cases I handle, because I've done Second Amendment cases for over 40 years, both in and out of the courtroom. I've worked on this sort of thing. And the mindset is this: you may not be guilty of the crime they're charging you with, but in their minds you're guilty of being a gun owner, you're guilty of supporting the Second Amendment, you're guilty of opposing, in this case, the Obama administration. The mindset is we're going to get you one way or the other. It doesn't matter if you're guilty of the crime we're charging you with. You're guilty, as far as we're concerned, of being outside of the box of where we want you to be.
It gets us back to Janet Napolitano's definition of the potential terrorist list. So naturally, if you're suspected of being a terrorist, well then, how can you love a terrorist?
Precisely.
It's just an amazing mindset these people have. I am hoping that we're going to be able to draft some legislation to deal with some of the abuses in this case. This, as you say, you found it in your own practice. We've seen it over the years. This Oriental despotic trick of destituting somebody and then saying, okay, now let's fight that we've taken all your weapons away from you, all your money. You're broke, you're destitute. See you in court. Ha ha. That's just got to stop.
It does. And the forfeiture of statutes, when they first came out, I said they're unconstitutional. They're taking people's property without due process of law. Unfortunately, the courts have upheld it. And I think the legislation needs to be passed by this Congress or some Congress saying this has got to stop because it's been abused by the federal government and it continues to be abused. And under this administration, it's going to be abused more than ever.
And it has been a bipartisan problem. It's just we get more of it under the current incumbent than we have under others. But there are none righteous, no, not one in this area. The federal government has increasingly become out of control, and the best I can see is that we're going to need some kind of an appropriations amendment where it says none of these funds can be used for forfeiture under Title 18 or whatever, blah, 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 U.S. Code, and cut them off at the knees like that. If the president doesn't want to sign the appropriations bill for, say, the Justice Department with such an amendment, well, then the Justice Department doesn't operate. Eric Holder doesn't get his paycheck. So it would be hard for me to see how we lose if we do something like that. And as a result, I think the president would sign it. He did that with Senator Coburn's elimination of the ban on guns in national parks. He wanted that credit card bill that Coburn put it on as an amendment so bad that he went ahead and signed that, and because he was in the process of taking over the banking industry, and what's a few guns in the national park compared to the socialization of our financial system. So I think we could find a way to do it, and that's probably the only way we're going to do it for the next 3 years, is to use that kind of an approach. So we are working on that. I can tell you that. It won't be a secret when it happens. So anyway, the other thing that I wanted to talk to you about, you've got a little a commentary, I'm calling it, maybe you've got a better word, on the United States Constitution, and actually gives the language of the Constitution, even with the archaic spellings, like choose spelled C-H-U-S-E, I think, probably more phonetic than what we have nowadays. But in any case, it's there as the actual Constitution was drawn up, and then you've made comments on it, and I think it's really very helpful for folks that are working with the Constitution a lot. It's not really that much of a news flash. The problem is there are, I think maybe you and I talked about this already, but I have yet to talk to somebody who's been through law school who has actually read the Constitution during a con law class. You read cases about the Constitution, and probably not much more than 20 years old at that. And so the idea that the lawyer has actually read the Constitution because he took a con law class is, somebody may have. Maybe you have, but I haven't met him yet.
Well, I don't remember actually being told to read it when I took con law. We're talking, many, many, many years ago, unfortunately. When I took my con law class, I don't remember being told to read the Constitution. Like you said, I was told to read case law. But I had already read the Constitution. I had been taught about it in high school. I read it. I thought I understood most of what it meant. But today, our kids are not even being taught the Constitution. If they hear about it at all in a lot of places, they're being told it's a living document, it's archaic, it's out of date, it can be changed at the whims of judges or the White House or the Congress. And none of that is true, and that's what I tried to point out in this booklet I prepared. It's a little pocket-sized booklet, 77 pages long, and as you say, I put my comments in about each article, each section.
The URL for finding it online, it's called Our Constitution by Michael Connolly, spelled E-L-L-Y, and we'll give you that after we've taken this break. Don't go away.
This is the Gun Owners News Hour. And here once again is your host, Executive Director of Gun Owners of America, Larry Pratt.
Guest today is Michael Connolly. He is the CEO of the U.S. Justice Foundation, United States Justice Foundation. We've been talking a lot about the Reese family and the horrible things that have happened to them because of your tax money and I being used by our federal government to make their life miserable. Would like to think that that is somewhat of an unusual situation. And, Michael, I hope it's, as you were saying, that maybe this was sort of the government's effort to see how it flies, although there had been other efforts to pin Fast and Furious in the early days on some Texas gun stores, so they just kind of laid low while it was kind of breaking news. But now it's not in the news anymore. We've forgotten about it. A real tragedy that this can happen in our country, and it seems like we're so unable to control the people that theoretically work for us. So you've put together this little booklet, Our Constitution, which could actually be kind of a surprise to some people. For example, the famous mistake that so many people have in mind, probably because they're taught that way in government schools, is that the separation of church and state is language nowhere to be found in the Constitution.
Exactly. I have several PhDs that read this booklet that told me they were aghast because they had been taught in high school and in college that was in the First Amendment to the Constitution. And one of the things I point out in my comments when I talk about the freedom of religion protection in the First Amendment, I point out that language is not anywhere in the Constitution, and I explain where it came from. And so a lot of people are getting this booklet. We had a Rotary Club in South Texas buy 500 copies of it to distribute to high school students down there in 6 school districts, because the kids are not being taught about the Constitution. And one of the things that they are not being taught, and one thing that a lot of people don't even know about, I mentioned this in a speech yesterday here in Plano, Texas, and I mentioned the fact that there is a preamble to the Bill of Rights. Everybody thinks, okay, there's a preamble to the Constitution. This is not the same thing. There's a preamble to the Bill of Rights, and that preamble basically says that these are, the Bill of Rights are rights that are not granted us by the federal government. We want to make it explicitly clear. The state said that these are rights that belong to the people inherently and to the states, and you cannot, as a federal government, touch these rights.
It's almost as if they were saying yet again what the 9th and 10th Amendments are all about. They were really hammering that point, and I'm glad you included that preamble, because I think, frankly, the 10th Amendment in some ways is perhaps the most important for our time, because it makes it clear that the enumerated powers are all the government is supposed to have. They need to be reminded of that in so many different ways, and the preamble to the Bill of Rights actually is an additional tap on that nail by Michael Connolly's little hammer, our Constitution. So hooray for you, my friend. I'm really glad you've done something like this. I was just thinking, if a student is reading this, say if he's caught reading this at a high school, might get suspended. So what I'm thinking is it may be that you ought to make recommendations to, like, that Rotary Club to say, now, make sure the students put a Playboy on the outside of this book so it'll be okay.
Right.
Oh, you're just reading Playboy. Oh, good for you, Jimmy. That's so nice. Oh, my. But I don't think I'm too far off from the attitude at the schools. They would not like the idea, because this is material that can end up challenging what a teacher is saying.
Exactly.
But teacher, it's not in the First Amendment. It's not about that at all. What do you mean it's not? Everybody knows that it is. And almost everybody does think that it is.
Well, particularly when you're dealing with a curriculum like this Common Core. And in Texas, they just got rid of something called C-Scope, which was basically an offshoot of Common Core. And in their curriculum, for example, students were being taught that the Second Amendment is not an individual right. It is a collective right that belongs only to the militia. This despite the fact that the Supreme Court has twice ruled in the last few years that it is an individual right. Yet our students were being taught exactly the opposite. So obviously something like C-Scope or Common Core does not want students to have access to a constitution, particularly a booklet like mine that says specifically and cites the cases in it that the Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms, is an individual right. And that's what the Constitution says, and that's how it's been interpreted. And, I agree with Mark Levine, who is a talk radio show host here in Dallas and an attorney, that when Congress votes on something like universal background checks or anything to alter the Second Amendment, they are acting unconstitutionally.
Right.
You cannot, by an up or down vote, change an amendment to the Constitution, particularly in the Bill of Rights.
Well, you can if it's a living, breathing document.
Well, yeah, but that's the whole point. It's not. You have the provisions in there to amend the Constitution. And for my studies of the preamble to the Bill of Rights, I've made a statement here recently that has shocked a lot of people, but I believe it's true. I do not believe that the preamble to the Bill of Rights is saying also that you cannot amend the Bill of Rights, even if you go through the process of 2/3 of each house passing an amendment and 3/4 of the state legislatures. They're saying in that preamble, the Bill of Rights cannot be changed. You can amend the body of the Constitution. You can amend you can get rid of an amendment that was passed later, but I don't believe that it is constitutional to amend the Bill of Rights.
I think that makes sense when you consider that Virginia and probably New York never would have ratified had it not been for the Bill of Rights being prepared. That was what made the deal, and it would have been a deal breaker to have not had those Bill of Rights every last jot and tittle.
Precisely. The Constitution would not exist. The United States of America would not exist if it were not for the fact that the federal government was strictly limited by the Constitution and by the preamble of the Bill of Rights and by the Bill of Rights itself, saying, these are our rights. They are God-given. You cannot mess with them. The federal government was created as a limited form of government. And, of course, they don't consider themselves that, but that's what the Constitution provides. Mm-hmm. And the Bill of Rights can't be touched.
Let's hope not. And I wanted to give out your URL before we have totally run out of time. Folks, you can get this little booklet, this commentary, if you will, on the Constitution by Michael Connolly. It's called Our Constitution. You can go to constitution.jigsy, I guess you could pronounce it jigsy.com. And that's where you can get this thing. It's virtually being given away, so you can get lots of them like that Rotary Club did and hand them out to undermine not the United States of America, but the efforts being made by the liberals who are such in control of the media that they can actually have most of us believing that separation of church and state is in the Constitution. Let's end that kind of ignorance. Get a hold of Michael's little booklet. Go to constitution.jigsy.com. Michael Connolly, thank you so much for what you're doing, my friend.
Well, thank you for what you're doing, Larry. I appreciate you having me on the show.
A pleasure.
Our rights to keep and bear arms has never been under as much attack. And gun owners of America are fighting daily in Washington to protect that right. This program, the Gun Owners News Hour, keeps you up to date on that fight. GOA is the only no-compromise gun lobby in Washington. The Gun Owners News Hour is hosted by GOA's Executive Director, Larry Pratt. Remember, the issue is not just about gun control. It's about control.